Good morning, everyone, and welcome back to another day of Aquarium Online Academy. Took me a minute to remember. I'm so excited to join you. I haven't been in the studio for a while, so I'm excited to join you all to talk about a really fun and colorful habitat in our ocean. You can see it right behind me. We're going to be talking about coral reefs today. Now, I know we're starting a couple minutes late. We were having a little bit of technical difficulties, but we're up and running. And I am joining the studio with my friend Tina and my friend Sophie, and they're going to help control everything you see behind me. Now, Tina's going to put up a number. So as we're exploring today, if you have any questions or any observations you'd like to share, or if you just want to say hi, good morning, you can go ahead and text us at 562-286-1838. So that's a live text line, and Tina will take whatever it is you say and she'll pass it along to me. Now, if you're watching on Monday morning, June 19th, you can go ahead and text us. But if you're watching on a later date, we'd still love to be able to answer your questions and hear your observations. We're just going to ask that you email us at live@lbaop.org. Now, we'll keep this text line up for a while. We might take it down, but we'll put it back up. But again, anytime you want to share any observations or thoughts or ask questions, go ahead and text us. All right, everyone, we are going to be exploring our coral reef. We're going to talk a little bit about what a coral reef is, and then we're going to explore some of the animals who call this habitat or this place their home. Now, right here is Shark Lagoon. This is one of our coral reef habitats here at the aquarium, and this is our live webcam. So we have cameras in our exhibits, and you can tune into them. They're all available on our website, and you can check in on our animals anytime if you're not here to visit us on site. And like I said, it's live, so if I walk outside to Shark Lagoon, I'm going to be looking at the same thing that we're looking at here. Now, I keep saying this is a coral reef habitat. Do you notice any coral in this Shark Lagoon? Because it is home for our sharks and some fish, and you may have seen some rays or even a turtle. Theo, our turtle, lives here. But the thing I want to focus on for a moment is the coral. Do you see any coral? If you see some coral and you recognize the colors, go ahead and shout out those colors, or you can text us what colors you see that make up the coral in this habitat. Now, I definitely see lots of sharks and fish. But if you look all the way over here on this side, we've got all these coral structures right here. Now, I see some reds. Did you see red? Excellent. What about green? That's right. I see some green right here and right here. This right here kind of looks maybe a little bluish, and maybe some sort of pinks and oranges. Corals come in all different colors. Now, the coral in this exhibit, I have a secret to tell you. The coral in this exhibit is artificial. It's not real. So these are just structures that we had a company make for us to look exactly like live corals. But I'll have Tina put us in an exhibit that has live coral in it, and we can take a look at all the colors we see and maybe a little bit closer at what coral actually is. Excellent. So in here, this is another one of our exhibits. This one is called Coral Lagoon, and you might notice some bright green stuff right here. These are live corals, and this red right here, and more green, and all the way over here. Oh, and there's a good closer look at some of these animals. We've got some anemones, and then some other corals over here. Now, what do you notice about those corals that maybe the ones in the other exhibit weren't doing? That's right. They're moving a little bit. So corals can move. Now, some corals are hard corals and some are soft corals. So sometimes we do see some movement in corals. But my question to you is, what is coral? Let's think for a moment. Now, I know that there's a couple different possibilities or suggestions that we often hear. We ask that question a lot to guests here at the aquarium. So corals, sometimes people say are an animal. Sometimes people say it is a rock. And sometimes people say it's a plant. So do you have any ideas? Let's take a moment, and I want you to think, and you can always text us in your thoughts. Is coral an animal, a plant, or a rock? So let's see. What do we think? All right, we're going to take another look at some corals here. So this is, again, another exhibit that we have here at the aquarium. But take a look and see if this gives you any other idea of whether corals are an animal, a plant, or a rock. Because I think in this sort of little clip, this is a video of one of our exhibits, it kind of makes coral look like all three of those things, right? You notice right here, we've got some movement, and this is coral. But if you look down here, or even this piece right here, or even this thing right here, that isn't moving very much. So that doesn't look like it may be alive. It looks more like a rock. So all of those three things, plant, animal, and rock, kind of seem like they could fit coral. But if you said that corals are an animal, you're correct. Excellent work. So coral is actually a living animal. But we got to kind of break it down because it's kind of a very interesting animal. So coral is an animal that's related to an anemone and a jellyfish. Now think about those animals, anemones and jellies. These animals don't look like anemones and jellies, but corals are in that same family. And so a coral starts from something called a polyp. And I think Tina has a video of a polyp that we can look at. Excellent. So this is what a coral really up close looks like. And you might think to yourself, that looks kind of familiar, especially if you live here in Southern California and you visited any of our aquariums here along our coast, including ours here in Long Beach, or if you've been to the beach and you've gone to tide pools, you might recognize an animal that looks very similar to this, the sea anemone. Excellent. And this is even closer look. And they do look like sea anemones, and that is one of their relatives. Sea anemones grow much bigger and they can live in different places, but that is what a polyp, the sort of beginning stages of a coral, is going to look like. And all these little tentacles that you see kind of waving in the air, those are very special tentacles. Now, thinking back to anemones and jellies, what do anemones and jellies do to protect themselves? Any ideas? How do they stay safe? Or how do they catch their food? That's right, they use stinging cells. And corals, they have stinging cells too. So all of these little tentacles have stinging cells in them, and that's how, one of the ways, there are two ways, but one of the ways that coral is going to get food. And so corals are going to start as these polyps we see here. Those tentacles are going to wiggle in the water, and any little particles of food, plants or animals that are floating by, the corals are going to catch and eat, and that's going to give them energy to grow. And a lot of corals, especially those hard corals, those ones that weren't moving, when they grow, the way they grow is by creating this structure that covers them. And those are the hard structures that we were looking at in that exhibit before. Let's go back to that exhibit. Excellent. So all of these hard corals, if we look really close, which I'm going to allow us to look really close in just a moment, but if we look really close, we'll see tiny little holes, and that's where those tiny little polyps live, and that's where they're catching their food and then building those structures around to give us the coral reef we see here. Now, I'm going to grab some corals for us to look at really close so we can take a look at where all those polyps would be living. Give my camera a minute to warm up. Grab my corals. We've got some cool ones to look at. All right, let's go on over to my, hold on just a second. So my camera's still warming up, but we're going to take a look at what our corals look like up close so we can see all those spaces where all those polyps live. Now, I said that corals get food in two ways. So one way are those stinging tentacles from those polyps. But in tropical waters where corals like nice warm water. In tropical waters, the water is pretty clear. And what that means to us is there's not a lot of particles floating in the water. So if you go swimming here in Southern California and you go under the water, it might be kind of hard to see. We call it the visibility is not great. And that's because there's a lot of sediment of sand and mud and plants and animals, lots of things floating in our water. But if you go somewhere tropical, that water is really clear. And so when you're looking down into the water, you can see really far because that water is very clear. And what that means is all those particles, there's not a lot of them. And so while polyps will take things out of the water with their tentacles, it's not enough for them to survive. So they need help getting that energy or getting that food. And so the way they do that is corals have a roommate. So each of those polyps is one individual coral. They live together basically in an apartment complex, but they have a roommate. And it's something called zooxanthellae. Now that's a really big word. But what zooxanthellae is it's an algae. So kind of like a plant that lives inside the polyp. And plants, they use the sunlight for energy. So zooxanthellae is going to use the sunlight for energy, and it's going to give energy to the coral. So coral gets food in two ways. It uses its tentacles to sting little particles floating by, but then it also uses its roommate, that zooxanthellae, that little algae that lives with it, is going to use the sunlight and there's lots of sun in tropical places, it's going to use the sunlight to get energy to help it grow. And so that is the way that corals are able to. Excellent. Look at this. We've got, this way. Still learning. We've got this word right here. This is zooxanthellae. Now, it's a big word, but I think it's a really fun word to say. So go ahead and say zooxanthellae. Excellent. So this is a little algae that lives inside of our coral polyp and helps them get energy to grow. Now, that zooxanthellae is also responsible for giving our coral all the colors you see here. So corals are known for being very vibrant, bright, different colors, and it's that algae that gives them that color, which is pretty cool. That algae does a lot of things to help our coral grow and be nice and beautiful and vibrant and create these amazing coral reefs that we see. Excellent. I'm going to give my document camera, it's still warming up, another minute to see if we're able to see the corals, and then we'll explore some of the animals who call coral reefs their home. Now, something you might notice, we can start to observe the fish that we're seeing here in this coral reef. What do you notice about these fish? Let's take a moment and watch them. Think about the size, the color, what they're doing. Coral reefs are an extremely biodiverse habitat. And what that means, biodiverse is a big word, but what it means is it just has a lot of different animals who live there. So there are tons and tons and tons of different kinds of fish and invertebrates, things like snails and sea stars and clams and squids, things with no bones. And then there's sharks and rays and turtles and tons of animals who call the coral reef their home. And so we're going to take a look just at a few of them. We definitely do not have time to get through all the animals who live in a coral reef, but we'll take a look at a couple of them after we look at coral. So my document camera is up and running. Excellent. So this is a piece of coral. Now this coral is not alive anymore. And as I mentioned, that zooxanthellae, that algae, is what gives it its color. But when coral's not alive anymore, it has no more zooxanthellae in it. And so that color leaves that coral. And so we get this white coral. I've got another piece right here I'll put next to it. But this can show you just how different corals can look. Change my lighting a little bit. So we've got two very, very different types of coral. But both of these corals, they come from polyps. And the polyps build these structures to create a coral reef. And sometimes we'll see these two types of corals living right next to each other. And that's what builds that reef, that structure of all those corals that create home for animals. So I'm going to move one off to the side, and let's take a closer look at the space where all these polyps are going to be growing. So look at those structures. It's kind of cool to see all these spaces. So each individual circle, these are each one home for a polyp. So this is a huge community. We call it a colonial animal, but it's a huge community of polyps living together, creating this one type of coral. And then if I zoom out and I'll switch the coral so we can see the other kind, the structure is going to be different, but we're going to be able to see all those tiny little holes for the polyps for this coral. So look at that. You can see all those spaces where the tiny polyps for this kind of coral grew. Oh, that's pretty bright. Let's turn it down a little bit. There we go. Pretty neat. I think corals are fascinating. All right, now that we understand what coral is and how it sort of builds those structures, let's take a look at some of the animals who live in a coral reef. I'm going to let Tina pick an animal for us to explore. It might be an animal you're familiar with, or maybe we'll learn about a new animal today. So let's see what animal lives in a coral reef we're going to explore first. Excellent. Now, you may or may not be familiar with this animal. This is actually one of my favorite fish that we have here at the aquarium, favorite fish in the ocean. This one is called a parrotfish. Now, you heard that right. It's a parrotfish, just like the parrot, a bird that we might see on land. And it's named because of this thing right here, its mouth. Take a look at its mouth. What do you notice about this fish's mouth? It looks like it's smiling. That's one of the things I love about these fish. We have a few of them here at the aquarium, and they always look like they're smiling. They're just so happy-go-lucky swimming in their coral reef habitat. But their mouth is really important and really unique to a fish, especially in a tropical habitat. So this mouth is actually made up of a bunch of teeth. You can kind of see how there's all these different sort of levels to it. those are individual teeth that are fused together. That basically means they're kind of mushed or melted together to create one beak. So it is teeth, but it's all kind of fused together to make a beak for this fish. Now think about a bird's beak. What does a bird use their beak to do? That's right, they use it to eat. And a lot of birds will use their sharp, hard beak to break into nuts or to peel at trees to get to the inside to the softer bark. And so they can use that beak to kind of break things. The fish does the same thing. So this beak is specialized to eat something really hard and crunchy in their habitat. Were we just talking about something hard and kind of crunchy? Yes, exactly, corals. So parrotfish, their favorite thing to eat are corals. Now, when they're eating the coral, they don't actually want that hard, crunchy thing. That doesn't have much taste to it. It's not very good. But what they want is that zooxanthellae and all the tissues, that polyp on the inside. But in order to get to the inside, they have to eat that crunchy outside. And so what our parrotfish will do is they use that beak to crunch the corals, and then they'll swallow it, they'll digest it, they'll take all the nutrients from the polyp and the algae that they can, and then they have to poop out that hard structure. Now, once it's digested in their stomach, it's been ground down, so it becomes this really fine sand, and when they poop it out, that's actually how we get our white sandy beaches. Now, here in Southern California, if you go to a beach, it's not the same sand. Our beaches have different sand, and we don't have parrotfish in our oceans, but if you travel anywhere tropical and you see a nice white sandy beach, a lot of that sand has come from our parrotfish friends. So we should give a big thank you to our parrotfish for giving us those nice white sandy beaches. And it sounds kind of funny to think about their sand as parrotfish poop, but it's really just pieces of that coral from that coral reef we were looking at before, ground up and then released because the parrotfish doesn't need it anymore, and they're just going to take out the nutrients that they like. Now, a couple other things about our parrotfish. One thing, what colors do you see? Yes, there's blue and kind of like a yellowish green. They're really bright colors. And we see a lot of our parrotfish and a lot of fish in general in the tropical coral reef being all these bright colors. Now, we talked about coral being bright colors, and our fish are bright colors. Do you think there's a reason for that? Oh, here's another. This one's called a bicolor parrotfish. This is a huge parrotfish. This one is probably about this big, whereas that other one was a lot smaller. But this is the biggest parrotfish we have here at the aquarium. And this one is also bright colors. This one's sort of a turquoisey, and it looks kind of pinkish here, but if you come in person, it's more of kind of an orangey coral color. So why do you think all of the fish we see are such bright colors? Could it be to match their habitat? Exactly. So they're able to camouflage or to blend in to their habitat. So we see a lot of fish are bright colors because their habitat is bright colors. And that way they can blend in and either hide in the coral or look like a piece of coral, and that allows them to stay safer in their habitat. Now, one more thing I want to talk about our parrotfish is something that's another pretty interesting, unique thing. Oh, I'm standing right in front of its face. Another really unique or interesting thing is the way that a parrotfish sleeps. Now, we don't really think about fish sleeping very often, and there are a lot of fish who will shut down half of their body in order to sleep. But what the parrotfish does is they actually use a sleeping bag. Has anyone ever been camping or gone to a friend's house for a sleepover or even just slept in a sleeping bag at your house? I definitely did as a kid. So a sleeping bag is that kind of, it's basically like a blanket that's a bag that you kind of wrap yourself up in. And it keeps you nice and snug and warm. Parrotfish, they don't have a sleeping bag like ours, but they actually make a mucus sleeping bag. So think about like snot, mucus. They secrete a mucus from their mouth, and they cover their body in a little sack. And that's how they sleep. Now, why do you think a fish would want to sleep covered in a little bubble of mucus? Because it sounds kind of gross to us. But could that be helpful or useful for this fish in any way? Let's think for a moment. Why would you want to create a little bubble around you when you're sleeping? When you're sleeping, you're not really looking out for any predators. So if you're in a bubble, could that protect you in any way? Yeah. So that mucus bubble helps mask the scent. So no animal can smell the parrotfish, and that way they can sleep in that little bubble of mucus, and they can stay safe. And then in the morning, they kind of break free from it, and they swim about their day. And then the next night, they do the exact same thing. They make that little mucus bubble, that sleeping bag for them to sleep in to stay safe. And then every morning they wake up and they burst out of that mucus bubble. So another really interesting thing about our parrotfish that just makes me like them and think they're even more unique and cool fish. All right, but a parrotfish is just one animal that lives in a coral reef. Let's take a look at another animal. Excellent. Does anyone recognize this animal? Have we seen this fish before? It's a pretty recognizable fish. And you're right, that is, or these are, clownfish. Now, clownfish are a tropical species of fish. They live in our coral reefs, but they don't live in the coral itself. They live in the cousin of the coral. Can you see these green things here with little purple tips? This is an anemone. And I mentioned very early on in the beginning of our program that anemones and corals are related. They are cousins. So they both have those stinging cells. But clownfish, they use the anemone as their home because they have a special coating on their body where they don't get stung from the anemone. Now we're going to bring up mucus again. Who would have thought we would talk so much about mucus on a program about coral reefs? But this clownfish, they have a extra thick layer of mucus that covers their body, or slime, and that protects them from getting stung from the tentacles of the anemone. Now most other fish, I love this video. These are called Clark's clownfish, or Clark's anemone fish. So clownfish is sort of a generic term. We also call them anemone fish because they live in anemones. And there's tons of different types. We'll see them in different colors, different amounts of stripes. Sometimes they're pink, sometimes they're black with a yellow stripe. Sometimes they're all orange with one stripe. Sometimes they have multiple white stripes. Tons of different types. But these ones live in this anemone, and we can see them swimming in and out of that anemone. But any other fish that's not a clownfish, if it tried to swim through this anemone, what do you think might happen to it? Would it be safe like the clownfish? Probably not. It would probably feel the stinging tentacles of that anemone, and it would either try and get away, or the anemone might try and eat it. So the anemone uses their stinging tentacles for protection or to catch its food, but our clownfish, we say they're immune. They don't feel the sting of those tentacles because of that thick mucus covering their body, and so they're able to live in the anemone. They get protection because no animal can reach them in the anemone. And then in return, they help protect the anemone. They kind of ward other predators away, or if the anemone is kind of a messy eater, which it is, and it leaves little drops of food, rather than those food pieces just kind of sitting there and making the anemone more dirty, the clownfish will pick and eat at all those things to keep the anemone clean. So we've got this cool relationship here where the anemone won't sting the clownfish, and the clownfish help protect the anemone, so they both protect each other. I just think they also look like very happy fish. I bet lots of fish in the coral reef are very happy because it's nice and warm there. There's lots of food to eat and all those vibrant, bright colors for them to explore. All right, we have got one more minute. I'm going to have Tina put us in our big tropical exhibit. So it's our largest exhibit here at the aquarium. It's 350,000 gallons of water, has about 1,000 animals in it, covering 100 species. Now, if you remember a little bit ago, I mentioned that word biodiversity, and that's all the different types of animals that live in a coral reef. So we have just 100 species. We have way less than the entire coral reef could have. So we only have 100 species, but even that is a lot of different types of animals. So we'll take about a minute to make some observations before we say goodbye of our big trop and see what we can find living in this coral reef. Excellent. Oh, we've got some fish. That didn't take very long. So this is a pretty big exhibit. You can see the coral down here, off to the sides over here, and we've got lots of different kinds of fish. Now these are tons of tropical fish, and I am by no means an expert at tropical fish. Oop, but I do know this one. We've got some cow nose rays. We've got an eagle ray in here. We've got, you might recognize this fish right here. This is our blue tang, a friend of our clownfish. So you can see just a little glimpse at all the different types of fish and rays. We even have a turtle in here. We've got some sharks, all these animals who use that coral reef as their habitat. All right, everyone, we are about out of time, but I want to thank you all for joining us today and exploring coral reefs, talking about what corals are and a couple of the animals who call this habitat their home. Thanks for joining us. Join us on Wednesday for another Aquarium Online Academy. Bye, everyone.